Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 2 game from the finals of the Croatian Cup. So we qualified by winning the Zagreb Cup. We lost round 1 of the Croatian Cup, and then in round 2, these were the results except for my game. So you can imagine that I was trying to do my best to win, to draw the match. Now, of course, I didn't know all 3 results at the beginning of the game, but my game was the longest one. And I'm going to ask you to pause this video 3 times to win the game for me. Okay, so my opponent was rated about 2100. He played d4, and after d5 he played knight c3, which was already a slight surprise, but okay. I played knight f6, he played bishop f4, the Jobava London, and I went for the line that I normally choose: a6, e3, and e6 followed by c5. This is just the safest line. You play a6 to prevent knight b5. So we have knight f3, knight c5, knight e5. Okay, and now I had a big think because I didn't really know this position. I actually had no idea what to do here. And I had a couple of candidate moves. The most obvious one was, of course, knight c6. But I played queen a5, and my intention was to take on d4 and play bishop b4. So after queen d2, c d4, e d4, I did play bishop b4, and I figured, okay, I'm going to double the c-pawns. My opponent's going to play c4, but I should have a small edge. He played f3, which is, I think, necessary. If he doesn't play f3, then knight e4 wins the game. Bishop d7, I would love him to take on d7, knight d3, and now I just take. Twice, takes, pawn takes. Okay, so c4 now became white's main pawn break, and white has to play it eventually. Bishop b5, preventing c4, a4, and now I was afraid of bishop c4 because of rook b1, where I'm forced to play b5. So I played bishop c6, which is okay. If c4 comes, my bishop's going to be active. So bishop d6, preventing castling, not a big deal. Knight bd7. There are no queens on the board, so the fact that my king is in the center doesn't really matter. And of course, I want to play f6, e5, and break open the position that way. King d2, knight b6, stopping c4 and planning to play knight c4. If I get enough time to play knight c4, knight d7, a5, knight b6, knight db6, then it's going to be great. So knight b2 preventing knight c4, rook c8, bishop c5, knight fd7, and he needs to make a choice now. He took on b6. I think not taking is better, retreating the bishop or putting it back on d6, but he took. Okay, and a5, knight d7, c4. So this is the first major decision of the game. I could have taken on c4, but then the game becomes very equal, so I just castled. And I should say that I was really trying hard to win this game, regardless of the other games, of course. And at this point, I didn't know the results of the other games. My teammates were still playing on the boards next to mine. So I allowed c5, and I figured this is going to be a very interesting imbalance because c4 has to be played at some point once again. Once that happens, I'm going to get the d5 square for my knight and for my bishop, and the d4 pawn is going to be weak. And all of that is true. Rook fe8, I want to play f6, e5, f4, so f6, g3, e5. And when your opponent has played c5, you can break the center easily because there's no pressure on d5. c3 doesn't really do anything. Rook e7, I want to double up my rooks. Bishop d3. I don't want to play e4, even though it may seem tempting to create a protected passed pawn, because there will be no way to win. I will have to play e4, f5, knight f6, h5, knight g4, but then h3 comes. So I don't really think I can make any progress there. Also, I cannot weaken c5 if I play e4. Rook ce8, rook he1, and now I took on f4. And the engine thinks this is my first mistake. Taking on f4, and after this white is better. The engine wants to play knight f8 and just reroute the knight to g6. Of course, I'm never afraid of white taking on e5, so I shouldn't have released the tension yet. Although, if I'm going to be honest, I just thought ef4 was the best move because I weakened the f4 pawn. So rook e7, gf4, g6, and my plan is now very simple. I want to go g5, create a passed pawn. and obviously white has doubled c-pawns, so white is never going to get a passed pawn unless I lose a pawn. So rook e1. I don't really have a good way to decline the trade. I could go king f7, but I don't really want my king on e7, so I took, bringing the white king another rank back. King f7, king d2, f5. I want to go king f6 or knight f6, h6, g5, and create a passed pawn on the f file. Very simple plan. And once again, white has to play c4. White has to play c4 at some point. Otherwise, there really isn't much counterplay. And the only thing I have to be afraid of is a double attack on b7. If I lose my b pawn, I lose the game. And that's what I thought in my mind. And that's true, relatively. So that's the only thing I need to be careful about. Okay, so my opponent played king e3. I played knight f6. He played h3, which doesn't do anything except prevent knight g4, but I really don't want to go to g4. King e6. Knight d1, and in this game you're going to see a lot of shuffling because, well, it's a relatively equal position. And I should say that in the finals of the Croatian Cup, the games were 90 plus 30, and you get additional half an hour after move 40. And both of us were relatively short on time at this point. So I wanted to get past move 40. So the next couple of moves aren't going to be too exciting. Knight d7, knight b2, knight f6, knight d1, and my opponent offered the draw. If I play knight d7, it is going to be a draw. It will be a threefold repetition, or this will be the second repetition. But in any case, I declined the draw by playing h6. I definitely don't want to draw because I think I'm the only one who can win. I knew it was equal, but I have a plan. So I played h6 knowing that bishop f7 could come, and I was trying to tempt my opponent into playing bishop f7 when his king was on e2, so that I can play knight h5, knight f4 check, preventing bishop takes g6. So that was one trick that I've set up. Another trick I had was playing knight e4 at the correct moment, and then playing dc while my bishop, de, sorry, if that's taken, while my bishop covers c4, so that I have time for king d5. So knight e4 when my bishop is, for example, on b5, preventing c4, and then king d5 coming into c4 would be a winning threat. Of course, knight e4 doesn't make much sense unless c3 is under pressure, so I'd have to wait for his knight to move as well. He played king f2, I played knight d7. Now I can safely repeat because I have moved the h-pawn. Knight e3, knight f6, king f3, king d7, bishop c2, king e6, and this is finally move 40. Now I have time on the clock. Now I can think properly. He played bishop d3, and I was already trying to set up this trick with knight h5 after allowing bishop to f7. So I need the king to be on e2 for that. So I need to sort of zugzwang my opponent. I mean, all of this is far-fetched and it may not happen, but it did happen. So bishop a4. I was planning to play bishop b3 at some point to prevent c4. But after h4, I decided against that and I brought my bishop back to c6. Now, of course, this just prevents c4 by force. When my bishop is on c6, c4 just loses a piece to dc, and it's check, so the bishop on d3 is hanging. So he played bishop c2. Bishop b5, once again preventing that. Bishop b3. And now I played bishop d3. And now I'm setting up a very nasty trick. So if he plays c4, I'm going to play bishop e4 check. And if the king goes to e2, I can safely take on c4, move my king, and bishop f7 isn't possible because I can play knight h5 with tempo on f4. So he did play c4. This is the first time that I'd allowed it during the game. So bishop e4 check. The king went to e2, which I was really happy to see. Of course, if the king goes to f2, then I have knight h5, winning the pawn, so that's not really possible. Sorry, if the king goes to g3. And if the king goes to f2, then I can go dc4, bishop c4 check, king e7, and then I'll have knight h5 anyway. So king e2 really is the only sensible square. dc4, bishop c4, king d7. On purpose, I didn't want to play king e7 so that he would be tempted to play bishop f7. Now, of course, he shouldn't play it. He should do anything else. There are plenty of normal moves. However, it already becomes very hard to defend the pawn. So if I turn on the engine, you can see that the king should go to d2 just to avoid all this trouble. And after king d2, I should go to e7 because this trick doesn't work anymore. Luckily for me, he played bishop f7. And now the game is winning according to the engine. I'd just assumed that it was easily winning. So knight h5. Of course, bishop g6 loses a bishop, so he cannot do that. He played knight c4. And I took on f4 with check. And he cannot really approach my my knight, because if he plays king e3, then I just win another pawn, and the game really is easily over. So he played king d2. I played king e7, chasing the bishop away, but he defended with knight d6, bishop c6, and now I'm worried about allowing d5. I cannot allow d5. If d5 comes, then c6 comes, and then maybe I could still lose. So that's the only source of counterplay, the potential passed pawn on the d file or on the c file. So I need to keep the b7 pawn defended. I need to keep the diagonal covered. Other than that, I push my pawns, I queen my pawns, I win the game. Bishop b3, king f6, bishop c2, h5. One step closer to queening, I'm going to go g5. There's no way to prevent it. My king is going to be on g5 and I'll have two passed pawns. So bishop b3, king e7, bishop f7, king d7, knight c4, a bit of shuffling, king e7, king f6, bishop b3, knight d5. Now this knight cannot be taken. He played bishop c2, and now I played knight e7. According to the engine, this is about -2, and g5 is coming. The game should be over. The reason I played knight e7 is to defend the f5 pawn. So after king e3, I played g5. He has to take. If the pawn isn't taken, I think the game is resignable because I just take or even push. So a5, king g5. Two passed pawns, winning according to the engine. Seemingly easily winning for humans. Seemingly. He played knight f7, king f6, which is correct. Knight d6, h4. Okay, if you turned on the engine here, it would say -4. And basically, there is no simple way to prevent the pawn from queening. There is no way to prevent the pawn from queening. King f2, bishop d5, correct. Bishop a4, king g5, correct. Knight e8. Okay, in this position, I played f4, which is still winning. But I would like to invite you to pause the video and win this game for black. What would you do as black? So king f4 is the easiest winning move, and I saw this, but I had discarded it. So let's say knight f6. I now go h3, and they have to go king g1, and now bishop f3. And the point of bishop f3 is to prevent any captures. So after, for example, king h2, I can now go king e3, and I don't queen this pawn, I just win all the other pawns. d5 really isn't possible. If d5, then knight d5, and that's it. I'm just gonna win all the pawns. So king f4, sacrificing the h pawn for these two pawns was the way to go. I played f4, which is still fine, still winning. Knight c7, bishop e4, bishop d7, f3. f3 is a slight inaccuracy. I should have gone knight f5 and h3, which would have been easier. Knight f5 blocks the bishop, so on d5 I have h3, and that's about it. I just play here and push my pawn. I didn't see this. I played f3, he played bishop e6, and now once again, black to play and win. It's the same idea, knight f5, and that's it. There are no moves. I just go h3, h2, f2. These are called electric pawns in Croatian. So let's say d5, h3, king g1, h2 check, king h2, f2 resigns. There's no way to approach the pawn. Instead, I went king f4 now. Still better for black, but not an easy win at all. Now, once again, you have to win this game. It's not too easy. I had a plan. Bishop g4, king d3. At this point, I knew that I had to win, otherwise we lose the match. So a draw isn't good enough. I have to win. Bishop takes f3. Bishop takes f3. And I had calculated that this is a simple win. King takes f3, king c4. Okay, king d5 isn't possible. It's just doesn't work. So knight d8, attacking b7. And I had calculated all of this before king d3. So takes, king d5, of course. I want to go king c6 and win the pawn. King g4, knight g6. The king cannot approach the knight. King h3, king c6. The knight moves away. I take on c5. Okay. If you want, you can try to assess this position and figure out whether it's winning for black or not. It's completely winning. Knight b7, king c6, knight d8, king c7, a bit of repetition, and I come to the pawn. Now, white's knight is in Zugzwang. Okay, so the knight cannot move. If the knight moves, they lose the game. I thought that my knight shouldn't move. And of course, I have to move the knight because there's no other way to make progress. My opponent assumed that this was a draw, and I blundered. After his king g4, I played knight e7. Dead draw. I wanted to take this way and then try to play for a win. Find the winning move for black. It's actually very easy. The winning move is knight e5, king takes pawn, and knight f7. What's the idea behind knight f7? Well, this knight has no squares. I'll just go king c6 and white is going to resign. King c6 resigns. I didn't see this. Instead, I played knight e7. Dead draw. Knight a5. And in this position, of course, if the knights are traded, I win. My opponent played knight d8, losing the game immediately. Once again, black to play and win. And I cannot forgive myself for missing this. So I don't know how much time I had at this point, probably a minute. I played knight c4, and I couldn't calculate everything, of course. And this is a draw. The winning move is knight b3. The reason is you're cutting the white knight way more efficiently from coming to the action. So after knight b7, there really are no ways to approach. King c6, where does the knight go? The only move is knight d8. And now king b6, there are no checks. I just push the pawn. King f3, a5, knight e6, a4. The knight cannot approach. I just queen my pawn. So knight b3 was easily winning. And this is actually a great sort of puzzle position. And had I had more time, hopefully I would have solved it correctly. After knight c4, the game is just a draw. If this pawn was any other pawn, I'd have winning chances. Now I don't have winning chances because my stupid knight is on c4. And we played on for a couple more moves. I tried. If I can set him up for a check, for example, if he plays king f2 here, then I win the game. If he plays king f4, then I win the game due to a simple fork, knight d3 check, winning the king and pawn endgame. So I played on because he still has to be careful. Unfortunately, he was careful. And in this position, I finally agreed to a draw. His next move is going to be king b5, and I'm going to be forced to play a4. He's going to take, and that's going to be it. So we lost the match. We lost 2 in a row, unfortunately. And it wasn't my fault, but I felt like it was my fault. I hope you learned something from this. Let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.